Hi there, I'm Amy Caruso, Head of Collateral Initiatives at ISDA, and I welcome you to our Connecting to Custodian session. I'm delighted to be joined by a group of subject matter experts on uncleared margin rule planning and implementation from our ISDA Custodian Collateral Working Group. We have Judd Baker from Northern Trust, Fuad Esteban from Euroclear, and Anna Minetti from JP Morgan. Our goal today is to ensure that you have all the tools and resources of how you can successfully implement your uncleared margin rules with custodians. And we really want you to take prompt and swift action, whether you are receiving or a pledging entity. Now, before we review Judd's and Fuad's and Anna's words of wisdom towards UMR Phase 6 success, let's recap a few regulatory requirements specific to custodian relationships. Globally, uncleared margin must be held at a custodian within a segregated account. As an example, I can't just pledge to my counterparty, and my counterparty can't pledge just to me. I need to set up an account on behalf of my counterparty and vice versa. And you need to do that for each and every relationship. There are some nuances in some jurisdictions where not only do you need to set up a segregated account at a custodian or triparty provider, but you also need to make sure that that entity is not affiliated with you or your counterparty. Now, segregated accounts can be held in with a triparty agent or a third-party custodian. And Judd and Fuad, please review for us the differences. Judd will highlight the third-party custodian relationship, and Fuad will highlight the tri-party provider.
Sounds good. Thanks, Amy. For a third-party custodian, I think that's just the term that is applied to all non-tri-party agents that can hold segregated margin accounts. A lot of similarities between the two, between tri-party and third-party. Just focusing on third-party, you'll enter into what's called an account control agreement. It just is the identifying document that hands the lien over to the secured party under certain situations. All three parties would sign it. So just the custodian as the intermediary, the pledging party as the account holder, and then the secured party as the pledgee in this case. Typically, what you'll see with the custodian's account control agreements, and we'll get into this a little more, is that the account holder will also have a custody relationship with that custodian, so master custody agreement and so forth. So there is some kind of connection already between the two firms, the intermediary and the account holder. And then on top of that, you'll have the custodian will, in most cases, require the account holder's assets to be underneath that roof as well. So where it's similar to a tri-party agent, is assets are just moving from one account to the other and vice versa. It still has the same controls in place as a tri-party agent. It's just that they're going to transfer from one account to the other. One of the other kind of differentiating features here is that when margin needs to move, the custodian is just going to need to be directed on which specific asset in which quantity. So they're just going to simply move what's in, regardless if it meets eligibility rules. The custodian is not taking that responsibility on to monitor eligibility rules or haircuts and so forth. So they're operating in a directed capacity. Assets are moved into the account, and when there's excess margin into the account, then both parties, the secured party and the client, would authorize the release of that margin. And so a lot more control of which assets go into the account, and that control is held by the client or the account holder. I think that's pretty good from a high level. Fuad, do you want to go into the tri-party piece?
Yes, thanks, Judd. I will try to give a bit of insight on the tri-party side. I just before that wanted to highlight the fact that the firms that will be in phase 6 will be facing a lot of firms that are already using tri-party. So the sell side today has been onboarding since phase 1 to 4 mainly, and they have all been using tri-party to start with, either to allocate or receive securities with the different tri-party agents in Europe and in the US. Now, having said that, that means that for the phase 6 firms that will come in, they will have to prepare for probably for the two models, because they will, as you said, they will probably be using their custodian to allocate securities and use their account at the custodian to allocate the IM collateral, while they would probably be receiving, a lot of them would probably be receiving the IM collateral from the sell side in the Triparty environment. So what first point is to make sure that both models are known for the firms that will come in phase 6, because they will need to prepare for the two models, and may sometimes also a different Triparty agent. For example, if their counterparty, one counterparty is with JP Morgan and the other one is with the Bank of New York, then they will have to prepare with the two. So having said that, if I want to give just some insight on the account structure that we're seeing, so as a pledgor or as a pledgee, there's a difference, but it's a little bit like you're saying what happens in the custodian world. So the pledgor usually has a long box at the Triparty agent, meaning that it's a specific account that has been dedicated to receive first collateral from the main trading account, and these securities that will be in the long box will be used automatically by the Triparty system to go into the secured account when there is a transaction that need to be covered with IM. So long box is for the pledgor. On the segregated account side, usually again, like in the custodian, it's the pledgor who opens an account, the segregated account, for the benefit of the secured party. However, what is interesting to note is that all the account structures are not the same. So you could, in some instances, and here I'm going to take the example of Euroclear Bank, it's not going to be an account in the name of the pledgor. It is an account in the name of Euroclear Bank that is opened for the benefit of the underlying pledgee. So it's very specific. And again, in terms of specificity, this is a unique account receiving from all the pledgors in specific subdivisions, while usually in other Triparty environment, it will be a one-to-one type of relationship, meaning an account, a segregated account, receiving securities just from one dedicated pledgor. So these are the main differences existing between the pledgor and the pledgee side in the Triparty environment. However, one main point that is common to all of the models that you will see in Triparty and the account structure is that everything will be automatically transferred. So the collateral that will need to move between the long box and the secured account will automatically be moved via the Triparty system without any further intervention from the parties, except the initial notice for the RQV, and we'll touch a word upon that in a while. But everything is fully automated, and the system moves the securities between the long box and the secured account, and then vice versa from the secured account to the long box when it's required to go back or when there's any substitution process. For all these account structures, the parties need to open an account. So they will have appropriate account opening forms that will need to be looked at the different Triparty agent. And in these forms, they can also set up all the reporting structure or needs they want to receive the information on the long box or the secured account. I think that's, in a nutshell, the kind of account structure that exists on the Triparty side.
Thank you, Fouad and Judd. So just to recap, both structures provide segregation and safekeeping. The Triparty structure also provides verification of eligible collateral. You can look at concentration limits, wrong way risk. That takes place in the Triparty structure. Compared to the third-party structure, the custodian takes direction from their client after those checks have been completed. So some nuances of operations of the collateral selection, but very important to know the differences. So we'll go on to Anna. Can you review what an entity needs to do when establishing a UMR account with a custodian, including if you've had a relationship already with that custodian or if you're brand new, and again, specifying in the third-party structure?
Yes, Amy, thank you. So from a third-party custody perspective, when the pledger is already an existing client of the custodian with an executed custody agreement already in place, they will need to engage their service team or relationship manager to discuss their account opening requirements and complete the account control agreements with each of the secured parties they'll be working with. If, on the other hand, a pledgor is just engaging with a custodian to provide services, then they will first need to execute a custody agreement prior to working with their secured parties on the account control agreement negotiations. Additionally, account opening directives will also need to be provided with details that specify the number of accounts that are going to be opened, the counterparties that are in scope, markets that may need to be opened, and any cash requirements that they may have and what they plan to do with the cash in the accounts. I would say that if you already have a custodial relationship with an existing custodian, you will be familiar with the timeframes and deadlines surrounding the onboarding process, especially the timeframes required to set up new accounts. If you're just beginning to engage with a new custodian, you may want to ensure that you obtain that information from them, how long it will take to open the custody relationship with them, and then ultimately start negotiating the ACAs with the counterparties. As well as what the timeframes are for opening accounts. Keep in mind that when you start working with your secured parties to negotiate these agreements, they will be working with a number of different firms at the same time. So my suggestion is if you can establish those custody relationships as quickly as possible, it will be a great benefit because you'll be able to start the process, the negotiation process with those counterparties sooner rather than later and have those accounts open and in place for phase 6. Lastly, you will also need to provide KYC documentation. Again, if you're an existing client, most of that KYC documentation will already be in place. The ISDA Custodial Working Group has created a simple checklist, both from a third party as well as a tri-party perspective that can be obtained online on the ISDA website. And I would suggest that firms, as soon as they recognize that they are in scope for phase 6, start taking a look at those checklists because I think they can be quite helpful.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for promoting our KYC. And it is a checklist that can be used generally. Each entity, each custodian may have some specific requests, but it will get you started and it will send you on a good path. Now, Fuad's going to take us through what needs to be done when establishing a UMR account with a tri-party agent. And again, generally speaking, although there is a nuance with Euroclear that he might highlight in fairness. And there are differences also if you're just receiving or if you are also pledging. So Fuad, take us through, make this complicated matter really less complicated for us.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'll try to do so. So I will focus first on the onboarding process, on the admission, what you call the admission and tri-party, meaning becoming a client. Usually with the tri-party agent, you have to become a client to access the service of the tri-party agent. So this is the first step. In order to do so for UMR, you will have to process with the know your customer or your client review and the compliance check. This is really the first step in the tri-party environment, whether you are a pledgor or a pledgee, and I will explain it further why. But you will have to go through this step. Mainly because the tri-party agents first have different regulations that are imposed to them, and they will have to follow these very strict rules. In addition, some specific tri-party agents have the status of the financial market infrastructure, the FMI. This is, for example, Euroclear or Clearstream, and they are subject to a series of regulation that they are overlapping, and they impose a lot of strict requirements in order for the FMI to take a client. So this can be, for example, different regulations such as the EMLD regulation 4, and then the add-ons was 5 and 6. They have, for example, triggered a lot of questions on the anti-laundering side. We need to really be sure of who's doing what are the entities that are joining these FMIs. There are much more detailed questions, for example, on the beneficial owner, and it goes until the ID cards. We will have to receive information on the persons that are behind the wheels of these firms. So the FMI also have regulations such as the sanction risk. And we need to cover those because the UN or the US can impose a lot of sanctions on the different entities. We need also to make sure from a general regulation, CSDR, for example, are very crucial for the FMI, and these are ruling the operational risk. We have other things that comes with the credit requirements, the IT security requirements, etc. So at the end, you end up with adding a very complex process in terms of verification of KYC and compliance check. Now, the whole process, as you see, it seems complex, specifically when you are a pledgor, because you will have to go through these different questionnaires. It takes time, and there's a series of documents that are available at each Triparty agent. Sometimes it's different, but they have all a list of specific documents that you can find usually on their website, or at least at taking first step by asking the relationship manager that will guide you through the entrance into the Triparty environment. We urge you to look at these specific requirements because they are going to really be the first step that you'll have to follow and meet before all other steps can be taken. So that's why we advise you to, as soon as you know which Triparty agent you want to use, to go and look and start the admission process. And if you know already, also tell your counterparty, because if you are a pledgor and counterparty must receive at a Triparty agent, then they will have also to quickly start this admission process if they are not client of a Triparty agent. So it's complex, and the reason mainly for that is the regulations that are covering the agents. But as Amy just mentioned, on the pledgee side, many Triparty agents have also tried to provide some solutions to make this process a little bit easier. With a quicker access, less questions, etc. So, for example, in the Euroclear side, when there is a pledgee only, I'm just really saying UMR pledgee only, you can use a new option that was created for phase 5 and 6, which is the restricted admission option. And that's allow you to go into the Euroclear environment, but with a shorter type of questionnaire. We don't use, for example, everything that is related to credit and things like that. So at the end of the day, for the pledgee side, on the Triparty agent, I think there is, a way to be admitted and start the onboarding process in a lighter way. Finally, just a word, as Amy was mentioning, on the pledgee representative structure in Europe, because I think this is something that starts to be quite known in the market. You can also, in Europe, for example, use a Triparty environment without being a client, using an intermediary firm. And the intermediary firm would be, for example, the Custodian. It is a client of Euroclear Bank, and it will execute all the Triparty documentation on the behalf of the underlying pledgee. So these are the main step on admission and the items that are important that needs to be looked at when you start your journey in Triparty.
Thank you, Fuad, and thank you for giving us some of those specifics. And I do want to emphasize that each Triparty provider, as Fuad says, has a little bit of nuances from their KYC and onboarding requirements. But today we're just showcasing a few examples in the hopes that you listen in, understand, and reach out to your third party and your Triparty custodians along with your counterparties as soon as possible. I can't stress that enough. So there is a lot to be done, but if you have a well-organized plan and keep in touch with your counterparties and these firms, you can easily make their deadlines. I want to give you a glimmer of hope there. This is not world peace we're trying to solve. This is onboarding to custodian. So let's go in that fashion. All right, so Jed, let's switch to asset manager considerations. Hopefully some of the folks that are listening to this session are asset managers. And in phase 6, this is not unique, but we have more entities expected than ever before combined. So all the phase 5, all the first 5 phases of entities combined will still not exceed the number that we're going into phase 6. And then we also have more asset managers who may take on the coordination for their end clients. So what are some specific considerations that asset managers and also their end clients should be aware of as they go through the KYC, the documentation, and the onboarding process?
Yeah, so this is going to be a kind of a unique one, and the numbers are pretty significant, sizable. I don't think there are that many use cases in phases 1 through 5, but there are some further complexities of this. So coordination is king, right? And the big part of this, as we described earlier, was that generally, more so than not, the pledging party is going to decide where their assets are going to be held. In normal cases, that would be the asset owner. So if the asset owner has a custodial relationship, I think that should probably be the first port of call for them, at least first set of conversations to understand if that custodian can offer the margin segregation services that they have. Now, the asset managers wouldn't necessarily dictate those terms. So in our opinion, but at least it needs to be coordinated. So the asset manager may influence that decision, but ultimately, between the two of them, the asset owner and the asset manager, they do have to decide where their margin is going to be pledged. And if it deviates from where their margin or where their assets currently are located, it does open up some new considerations. You know, that asset manager has to prompt the asset owner to open up a new custodial relationship. There's a new set of fees, a new set of commercials. You're moving assets away from one party that might provide accounting services, performance reporting, corporate actions monitoring, all these other ancillary services that a custodian offers, and then causing a little wrinkle into the process if you're going to move that away from the custodian. So I guess the key message here is talk to your clients to understand if they're in scope, understanding the regulations, the jurisdictions. They should know that already. But the custody selection part is critical there. On top of that, you have a couple other kind of considerations, but I think it's more about threshold management and so forth. It's not really the focus of this webinar or this recording. So, just keep that in mind that there is a threshold that needs to be managed at the at the account holder level or the legal entity holder level. And that may be distributed to the asset managers, or there's just a couple different ways of doing that, but that dynamic certainly is introduced into the picture. And then lastly, kind of going back to Fuad's messages about, to be a pledgee. So with some of the organizations, like what Fuad was mentioning for Euroclear, one easier way into that is to find a custodian, a current member of Euroclear, for example, to be your representative. And so that really goes hand in hand with the custody relationship. Again, the asset manager working with the client to understand who their custodian is, and then to find out from that custodian, do you offer a pledgee representative service? So again, reaching out to all the parties that could be part of the picture is really critical, just to get around some of these unique challenges that are introduced with separately managed accounts. Back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Jed.
Amy.
Oh, we do.
Sorry, Amy.
That's okay. But Anna is going next. She has the next question.
Great.
Oh, hey, there you go. Over to you, Anna.
So margin call volume is expected to increase. And along with that, settlement volumes will increase. Along with that, receiving back collateral after you've gone over the excess will also increase. And it's an opportunity where maybe manual, semi-manual processes of the past could be automated. So Anna, I know you love this topic and you speak about it passionately. So share how firms can automate their collateral processing while also meeting regulatory requirements?
Yes, definitely. So we are definitely anticipating that the volumes of settlement and releases will be quite high for phase 6, since the ANA calculation of 8 billion is significantly lower than previous phases. So many more entities across a number of segments will be in scope for the regulation. Therefore, we believe it's extremely critical for firms that are in scope to really place a lot of emphasis on automation in general. The industry has been working for quite some time to try to eliminate the use of faxes that has practically dominated the collateral processing environment in the past, and move to a more straight-through processing environment via various methods such as SWIFT, end-to-end utility providers, as well as online custodial tools. Firms should really try to engage with their custodians as early as possible to advise what instruction methods they're planning to use for collateral movements, as well as engage with their secured parties to determine what instruction capabilities they have in place. The one message that has emerged as the new industry standard for collateral release is the MT527 message. It allows a secured party to automatically authorize the release of collateral off the back of a matching instruction from the pledgor. Many firms, many custodians as well, have already built their capabilities in anticipation of the use of that message for phase 5 and definitely into phase 6. It will also be really important to have these conversations up front, as we noticed that during phase 5 implementation, there were many firms that did advise that they would be able to implement some form of automation. However, in the end, they were not ready to move forward. So I can't stress enough how important it is to understand those things way before we're going into production mode. There are various workflows that the parties can use as well. There's the single instruction method of instruction, and also the dual authorization instruction method. Single instruction is where one party is able to unilaterally instruct across the account and release collateral with one instruction. And then dual instruction, of course, is where both parties would need to authorize the release of the instructions. It will be critical to have that information as well upfront, which method they will be using. And of course, that will also be written into the terms of the ACA. There are currently a number of ways that custodians can send and receive messages. SWIFT, as we already mentioned, emails for some custodians, faxes, of course, is the fallback. The utility providers or third-party providers that firms can use, and the custodian online portals. And there's also a number of ways reporting can be received and sent to both parties. Again, also via SWIFT. The utility provider itself can provide that information directly, or the custodian can provide reporting through their online portals. It will be imperative to understand what the reporting requirements are for each of the parties at the onset and have that set up so that there is full transparency into all the transactions and activity taking place in the accounts from day one. So, yeah.
Thanks, Anna. And you mentioned a couple of things that folks can find more details, again, on the ISDA margin InfoHub. So an implied commercial. There is a market practice that was developed by another trade association who we love, ZITSI, who goes through the single authorization, dual authorization, and utility model for SWIFT messaging. And then also we have the ISDA Triparty and third-party suggested operational practice, which does not include faxing. Suggested operational practices do not include faxing. So you're not going to find that in there. At least I hope not. Unless it's a disaster recovery mode, then maybe.
Right.
But other than that, we really encourage folks to automate. All right. So Anna took us through the third-party process. Fuad, the tri-party, as you highlighted earlier, there's a lot of automation in there. If you could just kind of hone in a little bit about the language and the terminology, because some folks listening may not have ever heard of an RQV.
Yes, of course. First, before going to the RQV, I just wanted to remind that the tri-party operational process compared to a third party is not a line-to-line type of process, but a basket operational process, meaning that it's a system that will select securities and will use the available securities in the long box based on the eligible schedule that has been agreed and move the securities in the framework of the agreed schedule. So this is a fully automated mode with all settlement instructions that are generated automatically by the system. So the only intervention of the parties in the tri-party mode is sending the RQV, so one notice that will be the information on the required value, so meaning how much you want to cover. And this required value, another thing that is very specific, should be the gross amount, the total amount of the IM. You don't need to, or you must not send the delta IM of the day. You have to send the full amount of IM that has been agreed since the start with your counterparty. So on day one, it's one amount. The second day, it will be the add-on of the yesterday and today. So this is the RQV. It will go into different channels. It can use Swift, FTP, or proprietary channel of the tri-party agent. Usually it goes under a ISO standard format. For example, the Swift MT527 format that Anna just mentioned. This is one of the, but here it's used differently. It's for pure tri-party. So this is the main format that is used across the different tri-party agents. This format can be used across the different channels, usually at the tri-party agent. So the instruction is sent by both parties, and it must match before it can be further processed by the tri-party system. Then once it's matching these instructions, then this tri-party system will perform a series of actions using the information of the RQV, so the amount that must be covered. And these actions that will come are fully automated. So again, no intervention done by the parties for such actions. These actions could be, for example, the validation of the eligibility profile, the evaluation of the collateral, monitoring the concentration limit, applying the haircuts, selecting the securities from the long box, and then automatically allocating these securities to the secured account. So again, a series of steps that are handled by the system without any intervention by the parties. There are other steps or other actions that are taken by the system throughout the life cycle of the transaction. Every day there is an optimization process that runs across the day to make sure that the securities are adequately allocated between the different counterparties. There is an automated substitution process, meaning if securities are required to return to the long box, then it is automatically detected by the system, and all the settlement instructions to move securities between the long box and the secured account, or the secured account and the long box, matching settlement instructions are generated, are triggered by the system. So again, no intervention by the parties. This is really the difference between the third party and the tri-party model. So there is no need for example, a day-to-day selection or affirmation like in the third party model. Now, this is the RQV is the initial margin amount, but there are other things that happens. So the margin calls that are fully automated. Margin calls are not really just the link to the IM amount. They are linked also to the fact that there are, difference in valuation. There are criteria that have changed. For example, security that is not rated anymore need to be substituted. So we take out the security, we bring another one. There is a change in the foreign exchange rate. So we need to take additional securities. Or on the contrary, there are too much securities sitting in the secured account, so there is an excess. And these are also, the decrease of this excess is automatically handled by the system. So margin calls and the decreases are also things that take place by the system without any intervention, and they are different from the RQV. And throughout the day, you will have also reporting that is available. It will advise both parties, the pledgor and the pledgee, of the movement that has taken place and ensure that at any moment the pledgee can monitor what has been received and if it's correctly covering the IM requirements. So this is in a nutshell the operational process in Triparty. Back to you, Amy.
Thank you. And thank you for both Anna and Fuad of condensing a process that is very, I wouldn't say long, but there's a lot of steps to it into a short amount of time. So I apologize that we're only doing about a 45-hour recording, but we do want to cover a number of topics. But the process of third party versus tri-party, I think, is one that especially newcomers to tri-party really need to understand, that they're not going to get a margin call that is, as of the day, they're going to get that required value. So Anna, we've talked about a custodial agreement, excuse me. We've talked about a little bit about an account control agreement that would be between the two counterparties and the custodian. But what are some specific requirements in the documentation that firms should consider when emphasizing automation?
Yeah. As we did mention previously, both documentation of custody agreement and ACA are the critical documents, and they must be negotiated prior to, of course, the accounts being opened. When automation workflows are set up, for example, where previously parties had been using faxes to instruct, we'll need to exchange all the appropriate details with respect to the automation that they will be using. Where an external utility will be used, we may also need an LOA or letter of authorization, allowing the custodian to set up connectivity between themselves and that utility. Typically, that document is signed by both parties, both the client and their secured party, to allow us to be able to do that. In the case of SWIFT connectivity, we will also need to ensure that we're exchanging the appropriate BIC information. The BIC addresses will be critical to ensure that messages are sent and received to the appropriate locations. The BIC addresses have very specific, there's very specific BIC addresses for the utilities as well. And those will be important to understand, at the onset what those will be. In addition, this could also be a great opportunity for some of the existing clients of custodians that already have a number of legacy variation margin control accounts with them today, to maybe start looking at that documentation, the accounts, the ACAs, and maybe look to try and automate those processes as well and move from a fax environment to an automated environment while they're doing the same for their SegIM accounts. We have already started these discussions with many of our clients, and hopefully this will be a move to eliminate faxes altogether from the environment.
What's the saying? Axe the fax.
Axe the fax.
And Fuad, from a tri-party perspective, each tri-party provider does have their own set of documents, but generally speaking, what are the requirements? And there's that eligible collateral schedule that I know we really want to make an emphasis on that for those viewing.
Yes, Amy. So exactly, there are some specific documentation available for tri-party agent. It's quite straightforward, I must say, because these documentation packages have been set up since the start of the UMR phases. Tri-party agents usually have worked with ISDA to standardize those agreements, and they are available on the ISDA bookstore. The advantage of these agreements, and here I'm emphasizing first on the ISDA bilateral agreements, is the fact that they are standardized, meaning that they do not need to be negotiated anymore. They can be taken off the shelves and just used between the parties. You should look at those documents. There are two sets of documents. There's the one on the ISDA side, the bilateral documents, and there's the documents that are specifically related to each of the tri-party agents. So if I start with the ISDA documentation, usually there is a document that is linked to the tri-party operational process of the agent, and one that could be linked to the security interest of the proposal, the structure that the agent is providing. And again, it will depend on the jurisdiction of the tri-party agent. So if I take the example of Euroclear Bank, there will be the collateral transfer agreement. This is for the operational side. And then there will be the Euroclear security agreement for the security interest. But the same will exist for Clearstream for other tri-party agents. This is a bilateral agreement, meaning that the tri-party agent is not intervening in those documents and is not part of these agreements. So it's only for the parties, and they have to execute those agreements before starting the tri-party agreements. Now, I must also say that on that level, there are a lot of legal opinions that exist regarding the agreements. These are usually provided by ISDA. Again, they are available on the ISDA bookstore. And it enables the parties to be comfortable with the different models that have been set up, because it's not exactly the same between one agent and the other. Now, if I look at the tri-party agent-specific documentation, so there is the account opening form, but after that, there's usually the tri-party service agreement of the tri-party agent, usually composed of the operating procedures and the terms and conditions, just describing exactly what would happen in the terms for the service. There is also the account control agreement that has been mentioned in the third-party environment, but sometimes there is an equivalent of the account control agreement. So it's not just an obvious agreement. It's sometimes included, like again in the Euroclear example, it's included in the tri-party service agreement. So you will not find a specific ACA document in the Euroclear environment. Now, having said that, there's other few things that need to be looked at. For example, the pledgor will give a indication of who are the pairs. So there is a document to enable the pairing of the parties. There is also the eligible schedule. I will touch a word just after the description of different documents. And then finally, there is the activation of the profile. So there is a specific document usually at the tri-party agent that enable the parties to validate the structure that has been put in place, to validate the choice of the eligible schedule, and then to say that as of this specific point, they can start using the system. Now, if I go back to the eligibility schedule, because I think this is one of the very important point that we are trying to promote, is that first, ISDA has worked with member firms to put in place some specific templates just to help the market in the negotiation as a starting point. So these are templates that sometimes are less restrictive or more restrictive. They're using different type of securities, and there are also the minimum regulatory haircuts that are in these schedules. So these templates are available on the ISDA side, but also the different tri-party agents have taken those templates and put them on their website, so you can find them there. In addition to the ISDA templates, there are standard schedules. There are also specific templates that each tri-party agent has built in order also to do the same thing. So help the clients that are coming in for the first time to find a pre-selected type of securities and use it to negotiate or to build their own tailor-made profile. We are trying to push and to tell the clients that it will be easier to use and start using the templates to start the negotiation and the building of the tailor-made profile, because these templates are already in the system. They can be quickly used, electronically signed. These are things that are much easier to start an onboarding process than to try to fill in everything from scratch. What I must also say for the templates, that you have to look at the regulatory regime in which you are before using one of those templates, because again, there can be some nuances in different templates, and this is just a point of attention that need to be looked at. I think there I covered the different aspects of these templates, Amy.
You covered a great deal. Thank you, Fuad and Anna. So to recap, there are some differences, but generally speaking, there are documentation requirements for both third-party and tri-party that are similar. On the ISDA website in the InfoHub, in the margin InfoHub, we have some tools and references. We have a document called Where to Begin, with IM documentation, and we have a user's guide. So everything that Anna and Fuad and even Judd had hinted about the ACA earlier in the session, all of this is in much more detail that you can sit down if you're a project manager or if you're from the legal department and really look through everything in one place. The eligible collateral schedule templates, we strongly encourage, as Fuad has mentioned, to use those, if not in your final execution, at least as a starting point, because we've taken a lot of resources from ISDA members, including counterparties and Triparty providers in our legal team, to develop what we think are pretty good templates that will get you maybe 90% of where you need to go, or maybe even 100% without having to have that negotiation back and forth. We're really trying to save you that pain and agony, because every time you negotiate another aspect of the eligible collateral schedule, it kind of sets you back. So try to use those templates wherever possible. And again, there's information within the ISDA website. So We've probably scared you all a bit of how much there needs to be done, but there is a light of hope. So regulators did provide forbearance. Now, specifically, if you as an entity, no, I shouldn't say you, sorry, if a legal entity and its affiliates facing off to a legal entity and its affiliates, which you can call both consolidated groups, if that's relevant to your structure and your counterparty structure. If it does not breach 50 million euros or dollars or an equivalent in other currencies and other regulations, if it doesn't breach that initial margin of 50 million, you don't have to document and you don't have to onboard. Now, that isn't to say you never have to document and you never have to onboard, but maybe you can prioritize your counterparty relationships. Maybe you're trading more volatile products that have a higher amount of initial margin, generally speaking, or maybe you have more volume with 2 or 3 counterparties versus 1. So really look at how your exposure is with your counterparty relationships. And going back to what Jed had said a little bit about asset managers and separately managed accounts, these numbers have to consider the entire legal entity. So if you're working with a pension fund and you as an asset manager are only managing a sleeve, you need to think about this initial margin threshold as a whole alongside those other asset managers. But there is an importance to this of setting up initial margin threshold monitoring so that you are not trying to reach 100% of documentation and onboarding for September 1st. If you only need 30%, maybe you have another month or 2 that you can project. You do need to keep planning and you need to have a runway because you certainly don't want to be left out and not be able to trade. But you can prioritize effectively. So really think about that forbearance in your project planning. So I hope that was a bit of hopefulness that not everything has to be done for September 1st, but you do need to be thinking about it and prioritizing. And it's important that you mention that when you're working with your custodians, so they know if there's a sense of urgency that you think you're going to breach on September 3rd, or if you think it might be more like November, they can appreciate knowing where to put you in the queue. So I'm speaking on behalf of all of our custodian friends who have mentioned that to me. Now, Anna and Fuad, is there anything from a production perspective that you want to add? Or we covered so much. I'm not sure if we missed anything.
I think the key to prepping for production, in my opinion, is really ensuring that firms allow themselves the time to actually test their connectivity to custodians. In the lead up to phase 5, it was apparent that it wasn't always factored into the onboarding plan, or maybe negotiations of the ACAs were taking up so much time that, it was something that was considered as an afterthought. But the ability to set up a UAT environment and perform full end-to-end testing does take time, and it is a lot of effort. However, it is definitely worth doing because you are able to ensure that all the systems are speaking to one another, the messages are flowing through in a straight through way. and that, sometimes something as simple as, a different characteristic on a Swift message will kick out that message and not allow it to process through at the custodian. And being able to remediate and address those issues way before going live is going to be critical, especially with the high volumes that we anticipate.
Thank you. Fuad, anything from your perspective?
Yes, I think in parallel to the onboarding process, and as soon as which Triparty agent you're going to use, we invite you to start building the knowledge of the Triparty environment. What are the processes, the system, how Triparty works, etc. So again, Triparty agents have provided a lot of different information on their website, either documents or sometimes there's a digital self-learning training modules, small capsule of small movies that are there to indicate how things work. So we invite you to do so. And also consider the communication channels. What communication channels and what is the connectivity that you're going to use? Swift, FTP, or proprietary channel. Make sure as soon as you know which Triparty agent, and when you have the onboarding starting, you can try to have the connectivity in place. See if you have the authentication or the certificate exchange correctly. And when you can do it, we invite you to test. All Triparty agents have a test environment. You can test, for example, the Swift 5 MT527 or the reporting the MT569. So again, do it so you are ready. And once you are ready and comfortable in the connectivity, then this is a further step in the approach to the Triparty readiness.
Thank you. And if for those of you who are new to Swift messaging or new to some of the messages that we've been mentioning, the 527, the 569s, all of this is explained in the Triparty and third-party suggested operational practice, so that one where we really don't mention faxes, but it does include all the Swift messaging. All right, so before we close out, I'm going to give everybody a chance to give maybe 2 or 3 kind of important suggestions. And we're going to start with Judd, and then we'll go with Anna, and Fuad will close us out. So Judd?
I'd say for the asset managers out there working with their underlying clients, the asset owners, I can't stress enough the coordination is key here. So many different moving parts here. And then especially with what Amy just described on forbearance and staying under a threshold, that requires further coordination, not just on how this program is managed to get to launch, your UMR live date, but also over time too. So have the conversations soon, and being kind of a bystander in this, we see a lot of pieces of information being sent from the asset management community to our clients, the asset owners, and we see our clients, the asset managers, kicking out those same messages to their clients. And there's not a one size fits all. We've seen different approaches on this, but I think we're coming down to the crunch period. So if you haven't already worked with your underlying clients, do so. Or if you're a fund and you have sub-advisors, start engaging with sub-advisors to see where their heads are and so forth. But that's probably the most important thing that I would say. So the second thing I would go on to say is, as mentioned before, it's your choice where your assets are going to be pledged to. So try to get to that decision point fairly quickly and start informing all your counterparties. On the flip side, you have to seek that information out from your counterparties. Where are they going to pledge to you? And that will force you to start working with these other custodians or Triparty agents. And so they bring you into the fray. You will have to be onboarded. You will have to be submitting KYC, AML documentation, as we've heard. So there is a lot there. And it may not have been your decision to work with that agent, but you are pulled into that process because your counterparty is pledging to you there.
Thank you, Judd. And Anna?
Yeah, so for me to add to that, there are 3 main things: the ACA, automation, and keeping deadlines. As far as the ACA is concerned, really limiting the negotiation of that document. As we mentioned previously, these documents have been reviewed. already with legal, ISDA legal, and custodians pretty much have a standard template that is in line with industry standards. So that should hopefully limit the negotiation process there. And once those are executed, it will swiftly allow us to open accounts in a timely manner. Automation, so where possible, automate. This is the key to everything. No one wants to be stuck with the manual processing of faxes. It is timely and prone to risk. And so we need to really start thinking about what that automation is going to look like, way before phase 6 next year. And then keeping deadlines. I think the key is that all custodians will have specific deadlines that they will be providing to their clients. It is really critical that clients try to stick to those deadlines as closely as possible. They're there for a reason. There will be a number of parties doing the same things at the same time. So, the deadlines will be critical to make sure that the accounts that are required are definitely opened in time for implementation of phase 6.
Thank you, Anna. And Fuad, what are your parting words?
I have 3 points, actually, Amy. The first one, again, is looking at the timing. But looking at it from the Triparty angle is the challenge of the scale and the concentration of the clients coming into the Triparty agents. We have to absorb the scale of phase 6 specifically as takers. So what the different Triparty agents have done during the different phases is creating specific onboarding processes and timeline and plan. So we urge you to look at this plan, depending on the Triparty agent that you're going to use, and make sure that you can follow the milestones that they are providing. That's the first thing. The second point is, again, looking at the scale, is the pattern of the onboarding that should take place during the phase 6. Does everybody wants to go for the 1st of September, or there are readiness after that, monitoring, looking at the IN threshold? Is there some priorities that need to be done in June, for example? Other priority in just at the 1st of September? Maybe some firms will come after that because they can be ready in December. So knowing the pattern is really important to prioritize the onboarding of the different clients that will come in for phase 6. And finally, I can say again a word on the knowledge. Start knowing and learning about the Triparty environment and the Triparty system and processes, because this will help you to onboard easier and then to connect in a quicker way to the Triparty agents.
Thank you. And thank you, Judd and Fuad and Anna, for sharing your expertise, sharing your kind of your pain and agony of the past few years, that hopefully those watching won't have as much pain and agony, that they'll benefit from the efficiencies that you and other custodians have collectively implemented in the industry. I encourage those who have already watched this, please share this with your colleagues, your counterparties, your clients, and also please go to the ISDA Margin InfoHub for all of our additional resources on calculating ANA self-disclosure, calculating initial margin, whether you're going to use the scheduler grid or the ISDA standardized initial margin methodology, information that we highlighted here around segregation, but also eligible collateral and how it's different in different jurisdictions. And then last but not least, our implementation resources. We have project checklists, we have reference guides on documentation. So please access these pieces of information and resources. And I'm going to leave with one other kind of challenge is while you're implementing UMR, as Anna mentioned and Judd and Fuad, really look for opportunities to become more efficient with your collateral management processing overall. If you have the budget, try to sneak a few things in there, right? So if you can automate if you have segregated accounts for VM, or if you're looking to automate your margin call process overall, you might say, oh, we need to just do what we can, but really look at how you can be much more efficient and then being able to optimize your collateral going forward. So thank you for watching. Again, thank you, Judd, Fuad, and Anna for representing your custodian community. And we wish you all a great deal of luck and success leading into September 2022.